They told me to go wash the dishes. Funny, they didn't realize they were standing in my kitchen. If you have ever been judged or looked down on, then this story will hit close to home. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this reminds us that good people win eventually. Let's dive in. 3 women circled me like I was something stuck to the bottom of their heels. The tallest one, dripping in diamonds she probably did not pay for, pointed a bony finger toward the kitchen and said, "You look like you know your way around a sink. Go wash the dishes before the guests start complaining." The second one laughed so hard, her champagne nearly spilled. The third one simply looked me up and down and whispered, "Who even let her in?" I stood there holding a tray of dirty glasses they had shoved into my hands. And my cheeks burned. My fingers trembled. But not from shame. From patience. Because the mansion we were standing in, the one with the crystal floors and the gold-trimmed ceilings and the rooftop garden overlooking the city, belonged to my husband. And before the night was over, every single one of them would choke on the apology they were going to owe me. My name is Thandi, and I need to take you back to where this all started. 6 months ago, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the rough side of the city with a leaking ceiling and a landlord who knocked on my door every first of the month like clockwork. I worked 2 jobs. During the day, I sold fabric at the downtown market. At night, I cleaned offices in the business district. I was tired all the time. My feet ached, my back hurt. But I never complained. So my mother raised me to swallow hard things quietly and keep moving. It was on one of those nights, around 11 p.m., when I met him. I was mopping the lobby of a glass tower on the richest street in the city when the elevator opened and a man walked out. He was tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. He had his phone pressed to his ear, and he was speaking in a language I did not understand. Korean, maybe. I was not sure. I stepped aside so he could pass. He glanced at me, just a glance. Then he walked out of the building and disappeared into a black car. I did not think about him again. But the next night, he was there again. Same time, same elevator. This time he was not on the phone. He stopped, looked at the floor I had just mopped, and said, "You missed a spot." I looked down. He was right. There was a small streak near the edge of the reception desk. I did not say anything. I just went back and mopped it again. When I looked up, he was watching me, not in a strange way. More like he was curious, like he had never seen someone mop a floor before. "What is your name?" he asked. "Thandi," I said. "Thandi," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I am Yunho." That was it. No long conversation, no dramatic introduction. He said goodnight and left. But the next night he brought me food, a warm bag from a restaurant I could never afford. He set it on the reception desk and said, "You work too hard to not eat properly." Then he left before I could say thank you. After that, it became a pattern. Every night he would come down from whatever office he occupied on the top floor, and we would talk. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 30. He told me he was from South Korea, that he had lived in the city for 3 years, that he ran a tech company but hated meetings. I told him about my mother back home, about my younger brother who was trying to get into university, about how I once dreamed of becoming a lawyer before life rearranged my plans. He listened. Not the way men usually listen, where their eyes glaze over and they are really just waiting for you to finish so they can talk about themselves. Yunho listened like every word I said was being carefully stored somewhere inside him for safekeeping. One night, I asked him why he always came down so late. He smiled and said, "Because that is when you are here." I did not know what to do with that answer, so I changed the subject. But feelings do not care about subject changes. Within 2 months, I was in love with a man I had no business loving. He was a billionaire. I was a cleaner. The world does not write love stories for people like us. At least that is what I believed. Yunho did not care about any of that. He proposed to me on a Tuesday morning, in my tiny apartment while rain hammered the roof so loudly I almost did not hear him say the words. He got on one knee between my small dining table and my second-hand refrigerator and held out a ring that sparkled so brightly it looked fake. I said yes. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We married quietly. A private ceremony. His choice. He said there were people in his world who would not accept me, people who would try to tear us apart if they knew too soon. Then he wanted to protect me until the time was right. I trusted him. I had no reason not to. For months, I lived between two worlds. In public, I was still just Thandi, the girl from the poor side of town. In private, I was Mrs. Park, the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the country. Yunho moved me into a beautiful penthouse on the waterfront, but I still visited my mother on weekends. I still laughed too loudly and kept my old habits. Money did not change who I was, but it was about to change how the world treated me. The gala was Yunho's idea, a charity event hosted at his private mansion on the hill, a property so grand that magazines had featured it twice. He told me to attend, to mingle, to see the world he operated in. "I will join you later," he said that evening, adjusting his cufflinks. "I have a meeting that will run late. But I want you there. I want you to see these people for who they really are." I should have asked what he meant by that, but I kissed him goodbye and left. If you are enjoying this story so far, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me what you think those women at the gala deserve. Now let me tell you what happened when I walked through those doors. I arrived at the mansion alone. No driver in a suit opening my door, no entourage. I drove myself in a simple black dress, no designer label, no jewelry except my wedding ring, which I wore on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath the fabric. Yunho and I had agreed that until the official announcement, I would keep things quiet. So I walked in looking like nobody special. And that was exactly how they treated me. At the moment I stepped into the grand hall, I felt the stares. Women in custom gowns and men in tailored tuxedos turned to look at me like I had wandered in from the street. I smiled politely. Nobody smiled back. I made my way to the refreshment table and picked up a glass of water. That was when the first woman approached me. Her name, I would later learn, was Nia. She was tall, fair-skinned, and wearing a red gown that looked like it had been stitched onto her body. She looked at my dress, then at my face, and her lip curled. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough for the people around us to hear. "Are you one of the servers?" I blinked. "No, I am a guest." She tilted her head. "A guest?" She looked me over again. "Dressed like that?" Before I could respond, two more women appeared beside her. And one was short and round, with gold bangles stacked up both arms. The other was slim, dark-skinned, and had the coldest eyes I had ever seen. They introduced themselves as Nala and Imani. Imani leaned in and whispered something to Nia. Nia laughed. Then she turned back to me and said the words that set the entire night on fire. "Listen, sweetheart. I do not know who gave you an invitation, but this is not the kind of event for people like you. Why don't you make yourself useful and go to the kitchen? There are dishes piling up. At least earn your keep." Nala grabbed a tray of used champagne glasses from a nearby table and pushed it into my hands. "Go on," she said, smiling like she had just done me a favor. "The kitchen is through that door." I stood there. The tray was heavy. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding. Not from humiliation, but from the sheer effort it took to keep my mouth shut. Because I knew something they did not. Something that would turn their entire world upside down before the clock struck midnight. I wanted to set that tray down right there on the marble floor. I wanted to pull the chain from around my neck and let my wedding ring catch the light of every chandelier in that room. I wanted to watch their faces crack like cheap glass. But I did not. Yunho had asked me to observe, to watch, to see who these people really were when they thought no one important was looking. So I swallowed my pride like medicine and carried that tray toward the kitchen. The kitchen was enormous. White tiles from floor to ceiling, steel countertops that stretched the length of the room. I knew this kitchen well. I had cooked breakfast in it just last Sunday while Yunho sat on the counter and stole pieces of toast off my plate. Now I stood in it holding dirty glasses that strangers had shoved into my hands. I set the tray down by the sink. Two of the actual kitchen staff looked at me with confusion. One of them, a young woman in a white apron, walked over and said quietly, "Ma'am, you do not need to be in here. We have everything under control." I smiled at her. "I know. I just needed a minute." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. I stayed in that kitchen for about 10 minutes. I splashed water on my face. I took a few deep breaths. I reminded myself that I had survived worse things than 3 cruel women with loud mouths and small hearts. Then I dried my hands, lifted my chin, and walked back into that grand hall. The moment I stepped out, I heard Nia's voice cutting across the room like a blade. She was standing near the grand staircase with a fresh glass of champagne in her hand, surrounded by a circle of guests who were hanging on her every word. She was telling a story. About me. "You should have seen her face," Nia said, her voice dripping with amusement. Standing there in that plain little dress like she had accidentally walked into the wrong building. I honestly thought she was lost. I did her a favor by pointing her to the kitchen. The circle erupted in laughter. Nala clapped her hands together like it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Imani shook her head slowly and added, "Some people have no shame. Imagine showing up to an event like this looking like you just came from the bus stop." More laughter. Louder this time. I stood at the edge of the room and let every word land. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I memorized every single face that laughed. Then a fourth woman appeared. She had been sitting quietly at a corner table most of the evening, watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. Her name was Zola. She was different from the other three. Where Nia was loud and dramatic, Zola was controlled and deliberate. She wore a black gown with a slit up one side, and her hair was pulled back tight against her scalp. She moved through the crowd like someone who owned secrets and knew exactly when to use them. Zola walked straight up to me. She did not smile. She did not sneer. She simply looked at me with an expression I could not read and said, "You are handling this very well. Most people would have left by now." I studied her face. "Why would I leave? I was invited." "Were you?" She tilted her head slightly. "By whom?" I said nothing. Zola stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Let me give you some advice. Whoever invited you did you no favors. These women run this social circle. They decide who belongs and who does not, and they have already decided about you. If you stay, they will make your night miserable. If you leave now, at least you walk out with your dignity." It sounded like concern. It looked like kindness. But something about the way Zola's eyes moved, quick and searching, told me this was not advice. It was a test. She was trying to figure out who I was and why I was not afraid. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, "but I think I will stay." Something flickered across Zola's face. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? Or something else entirely? And she nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked back to her corner table without another word. The night pressed on. I moved through the gala like a ghost. I stood near walls. I listened to conversations I was not invited into. I watched wealthy men shake hands and make deals over whiskey. I watched their wives compare jewelry and tear apart anyone who was not in the room. It was a circus dressed in silk. At one point, Nia spotted me again. This time she did not bother walking over. She simply pointed at me from across the room and called out, "Oh, you are still here? I thought you would have finished the dishes by now." Her voice was loud enough to turn heads. Several guests looked at me. Some of them chuckled. A man in a gray suit shook his head and muttered something I could not hear. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out and saw a message from Yunho. It read, "I am 15 minutes away. How are they treating you?" I typed back, "Exactly how you said they would." His reply came fast. "Good. Now they will see exactly who they were talking to." I put my phone away and felt my heartbeat shift. Not faster, steadier, like a drum finding its rhythm before the real song begins. 14 minutes later, the front doors of the mansion opened. I heard the commotion before I saw him. The whispers started at the entrance and rippled through the room like wind across water. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Yunho walked in wearing a black suit that looked like it had been cut from the night sky itself. His hair was swept back. His jaw was set. But his eyes scanned the room with the quiet authority of a man who did not need to announce himself because the walls already knew his name. Behind him walked two assistants, a personal security detail and the event coordinator, who was practically tripping over herself trying to keep up. The room parted for him, not because anyone told them to, but because power has a frequency, and every person in that hall could feel it vibrating through the floor. Nia's champagne glass stopped moving. Her mouth opened slightly. Nala grabbed her arm and whispered something urgent. Imani took a full step backward, like the ground beneath her had shifted. Because they knew him. Everyone knew him. His face had been on the cover of 3 international business magazines this year alone. and his company had just closed a deal worth more than most countries see in a decade. He was the man every woman in that room had been hoping would walk through the door. And he did walk through the door. But he did not walk toward any of them. He walked toward me. The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice settling in glasses. You could hear the click of his shoes on the marble floor. Every eye in that grand hall followed him as he crossed the room with long, deliberate strides. He did not look left. He did not look right. He looked only at me. When he reached me, he did something that made Nia's champagne glass slip from her fingers and shatter on the floor. He cupped my face in both hands, right there in front of everyone, and kissed my forehead. Then he pulled back, looked into my eyes, and said loud enough for every guest within 30 feet to hear, "I am sorry I am late, my love. Did they take good care of you?" The silence that followed was so thick you could have choked on it. If you think that moment was satisfying, you have no idea what is coming next. Subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me what you think Nia's face looked like in that moment. Because what Yunho did after that kiss made every single person in that room wish they had never stepped foot in his mansion. Stay with me. The best part is coming. I did not answer his question. I did not need to. The look on my face told him everything. Yunho's jaw tightened. His eyes, warm just a second ago when he looked at me, turned cold as he turned to face the room. It was the kind of cold that made people shrink. And the kind that reminded everyone that kindness from a powerful man is a choice, not a weakness. He kept one arm around my waist. His grip was firm, protective. Then he raised his voice just enough to carry across the entire hall. For those of you who do not know, this woman standing beside me is my wife. Her name is Thandi Park. She is the lady of this house. Every piece of art on these walls, every flower arrangement on these tables, every detail of tonight's event was approved by her. She is not your server. She is not your entertainment. She is the reason any of you were invited here at all. The room did not just go quiet. It collapsed. I watched the blood drain from Nia's face in real time. Her skin, which had been glowing with arrogance all night, turned the color of ash. Dinala's gold bangles rattled because her hands were shaking. Imani looked like she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Yunho was not finished. He turned to the event coordinator, a slim woman with a clipboard who had been standing nervously near the entrance, and said, "Bring me the guest list." The coordinator rushed over and handed him a tablet. Yunho scrolled through it slowly, his face unreadable. Then he looked up and said, "I understand that some guests tonight took it upon themselves to instruct my wife to wash dishes in her own kitchen. I would like those guests to identify themselves. Now." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The chandelier above seemed to flicker, though it was probably my imagination. Yunho waited 5 seconds. Then he turned and looked directly at Nia. "You," he said, in the red dress. "You told my wife to go wash dishes. Is that correct?" Nia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked left and right, desperate for someone to rescue her. Nobody stepped forward. Nala and Imani had both taken several steps away from her, as if cruelty was a disease they were suddenly afraid of catching. "I did not know," Nia finally stammered. "I had no idea she was your wife. She was not dressed like, she did not look like she belonged." The room flinched at that last word. Belonged. It hung in the air like smoke. Yunho smiled. But it was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that comes right before consequences. "She did not look like she belonged," he repeated slowly. "Tell me, what does belonging look like to you? Does it look like a designer gown? Does it look like borrowed diamonds? Does it look like showing up to a man's house and disrespecting his wife because you assumed she was beneath you?" Nia's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth again, but Yunho raised a hand and she went silent. He turned to face the entire room. "Let me be very clear. My wife grew up with nothing. She worked 2 jobs to survive. She mopped floors and sold fabric and never once lost her dignity. That woman has more grace in her smallest finger than this entire room combined. And the fact that some of you looked at her and saw someone to mock tells me everything I need to know about the kind of people I have been doing business with." He paused. The silence was deafening. "Effective immediately. Every business partnership, every contract, every deal connected to anyone who disrespected my wife tonight is under review. My legal team will be in touch. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man in a gray suit, the same one who had shaken his head at me earlier, stepped forward with panic in his eyes. "Mr. Park, please, let us not be hasty. This was a misunderstanding." Yunho looked at him. "A misunderstanding is when you forget someone's name. What happened tonight was a choice, and choices have consequences." The man stepped back like he had been slapped. Then something happened that I did not expect. Zola stood up from her corner table. She walked calmly to the center of the room, her black gown trailing behind her like a shadow. She stopped a few feet from Yunho and looked at him with steady eyes. "Mr. Park," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I tried to warn your wife to leave, not because I agreed with what those women did, but because I knew what was coming. I have been in rooms like this my entire life. I know how these people operate." Yunho studied her. "And yet you said nothing to stop them." Zola held his gaze. "You are right, and that is something I will have to live with. But I want your wife to know that not everyone in this room is her enemy." She turned to me. For the first time all night, I saw something real in her eyes. Not calculation, not strategy. Something that looked a lot like regret. "I am sorry, Thandi," she said. "You deserved better tonight." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded. Not because I forgave her completely, but because I recognized the courage it took to stand up when everyone else was busy looking at their shoes. Yunho squeezed my hand. I looked up at him, and he looked down at me. And in that single glance, I felt every late-night conversation in that office lobby, every bag of food left on the reception desk, every quiet moment that built the bridge between his world and mine. He leaned in close and whispered, "Do you want to say anything to them?" I looked out at the room, at Nia, who was silently crying, at Nala, who could not meet my eyes, at Amani, who had pressed herself against the far wall like she was trying to disappear, at the dozens of guests who had laughed when I was humiliated and were now drowning in the silence of their own shame. I stepped forward. My voice was calm. My hands were still. 6 months ago, I was mopping floors at 11 o'clock at night. I was tired, I was broke, and I was invisible. Nothing about my outside appearance told the world I was worth anything. But one man saw me. Not my clothes, not my bank account, me, and he chose me. So when you looked at me tonight and decided I did not belong, you were not insulting me. You were revealing yourselves. I let that settle. Then I turned my back to them, took my husband's arm, and walked toward the grand staircase that led to our private quarters. Behind us, the gala crumbled. Guests grabbed their coats and headed for the exits. Partnerships dissolved before the valet could bring the cars around. Reputations that took years to build were shattered in the time it took to climb a flight of stairs. At the top of the staircase, I stopped and looked back one final time. The grand hall, still glittering with crystal and gold, was emptying fast. The flowers were still perfect. The music was still playing, but the room felt completely different now. Because the people in it had finally learned a lesson that no amount of money could buy. Never judge the woman holding the tray. You never know who she goes home to. And if you've made it this far, comment, "I'm here." And tell me where you're watching from. Let's see which country is representing the most.